When designing for the theater, it's helpful to be able to recognize some of the terms we use in the art world to define different artistic styles. In this presentation, I'm going to show you some examples of some of these various styles that you might come across in the theater.
This slide represents realism. This is a realistic tree on stage. We can see that this is not a real tree. It's a tree that's been constructed on stage. We can clearly see some lighting instruments behind it and some backstage area. However, it still has been created in a realistic style that we recognize to be a tree. Compare that to this set. We understand this to be a forest, even though the shapes are not realistic. The leaves are not real leaves. They look like pieces of paper. So this is more stylized or non-realistic. Selective realism chooses specific items to be realistic that tells us the time and place. There are no walls here, but we recognize this to be a room with walls. The audience will suspend their disbelief. Often in the case of selective realism, the costumes will be more accurate to give the information about the time setting and the world of the play. Impressionism in painting is just blobs of color, but when we're far away from it, our brain will fill in the information so it looks like a painting. We have to make a leap to make sense of it. Often portrays life through rose-colored glasses. It's a style that presents pretty, soft, genteel pictures. It's a life of leisure. So when you look at an impressionistic painting up close, all you see is a bunch of little dots of color. We now have an understanding of using pixels to create images, but that was an idea that's come about after digital imagery was created, specifically in about 1957 for television. Impressionist painting came about in the late 1800s, so its method was really a very new idea at the time. Expressionism in art represents the character's inner emotional world. As Wikipedia says, Expressionism is notoriously difficult to define, in part because it overlapped with other major isms of the modernist period, with Futurism, Cubism, Surrealism, and Dadaism. These were all new art forms at the turn of the last century. Expressionism was a movement that developed in the early 20th century, mainly in Germany, in reaction to the dehumanizing effect of industrialization. Expressionism identified itself as an avant-garde movement, and the Expressionists rejected the ideology of realism. Expressionists reject the soft, beautiful view of the world from the Impressionists. Their view is often filled with anxiety and angst. The Scream by Edvard Munch is a classic example of Expressionism.
Here we have a classic example of Expressionism on stage. We are left with a feeling of anxiety and foreboding. And looking at this set, it could be expressionistic as a warped view of the world whose characters are having a warped experience, but the shapes and childlike rendering of the buildings and clouds give it a whimsical feeling that isn't in line with the angst usually attributed to Expressionism. So instead, we would call this set stylized. The Mystery of Irma Vep is a satire of several theatrical, literary, and film genres, including Victorian melodrama, farce, the Penny Dreadful, Wuthering Heights, and the Alfred Hitchcock film Rebecca. This is a color photo. This set shows a very cartoony stylization of the Gothic Victorian mystery. It's probably designed to resemble a black and white movie. The floor is sharply raked to give a forced perspective, and everything is done in grayscale. Here is another example of stylization of the Peanuts cartoon characters. Notice the larger-than-life notebooks and the pencils and the very bright colors with sharp definition. This is a stylized, psychedelic version of 1960s hippies or flower children. Compare that image to photos of people at Woodstock in 1969, real flower children and hippies. Flower power movement was meant to be a peaceful protest to the Vietnam War, as well as youthful turning away from the conservative mainstream culture of the 1950s. Here is another example of stylization. We have a realistic German World War II military uniform on the left versus a stylized uniform costume on the right. Another example of real versus stylized. On the left, you have real women police officers, and on the right, you have a stylized costume version. Stylization can also be a general exaggeration of features. This costume provides a heightened sense of drama through the use of high contrasting colors, patterns, and design details. This set is modern industrial. It uses slick materials that are often shiny, polished metals and glass in sharp geometric shapes. This set is a good blend of modern and Edwardian to show unity. The set could be futuristic or even post-apocalyptic if you take out the Edwardian costumes and props, or even an abstracted representation of a cathedral. This is an example of the Baroque style. This classical style is often symmetrical, using a lot of gold and scroll work and lots of details converging. Often it includes cherubs and mythological or biblical images. Here we can see some fashions of the Baroque era in a classic Baroque setting. Classical architecture has symmetrical balance and draws influence from ancient Greek and Roman styles. Here we have an example of classicism in art. The clothing of these people shows the Greek and Roman aesthetics of beauty. Modernism in art rejects the ideology of realism. It's self-conscious, it experiments with form, roughly the period from the 1860s to the 1970s. Can you see how the classical style, when combined with modern styles, becomes postmodern? Postmodern draws from the classical style, but uses it in a modern way. These are some examples of pop art, which focuses on the commercialism of art. It's generally bright, bold colors. Pop artists celebrated commonplace objects and people of everyday life, in this way seeking to elevate popular culture to the level of fine art. This final video in our style series shows the convergence of several forms of art. We have pop art, impressionism, pointillism, and stylization. The cartoon image on the left is the work of Roy Lichtenstein, who was one of the first American pop artists. His art was inspired by comic strips and used a series of uniform small dots in a style similar to the Impressionists. The makeup application on the right is a stylized interpretation of Roy Lichtenstein's artwork. You can feel free to merge different styles of art in creative ways to help you define and bring your characters to life.